Namaskar, aspirants, and a very warm welcome. Today, we're going to break down a really important topic for your GS3 economy paper, the complex and often pretty painful cost of getting inflation under control.
That's right. And we're not just looking at India by itself. We're going to compare its journey with what happened in the US and the UK. You see, understanding these global connections is exactly what will make your mains answer stand out.
So, this brings us to the biggest question for any policymaker, and for you as a future one. What is the real cost of bringing prices down? Just how much economic growth are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of stability? This is the core dilemma we're going to explore today.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this discussion. First, we'll set the scene with the global inflation problem. Then, we'll look at the very different paths the US and UK took. From there, we'll focus on India's own specific challenges, explain a crucial term called the sacrifice ratio, and finally, pull it all together with key takeaways for your exam.
Right. Let's set the stage. The world after COVID was, well, a perfect storm. You had supply chains that were completely broken from the pandemic, governments pumping huge amounts of money into their economies, and then the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which sent energy and food prices through the roof. It was a shock felt by everyone, everywhere.
Now have a look at this slide. It basically tells the whole story in two simple charts. Look at the top one, chart 1. See how those lines for the US, UK, and India all just shoot up together? That's the sound of the world's central banks slamming on the brakes. Now look at chart 2, just below it. You can see the result. Inflation starts to come down in all three countries. But, and this is the key, notice how steep or gradual those falling lines are. They're all different. And that difference is really the puzzle we're trying to solve.
And this just perfectly captures that classic dilemma. To cool down an overheating economy, you have to raise interest rates. It makes borrowing more expensive, which reduces demand. But at the same time, that very action can put the brakes on investment and spending, risking a full-blown slowdown. It's an incredibly tough balancing act.
So how did this balancing act actually play out? Well, let's compare two major developed economies, the United States and the United Kingdom. They were both hit by the same storm, but they navigated it very differently, and that led to completely different results.
This timeline really shows you how aggressive the response was. I mean, in the US, inflation hit a massive 9.1%. That forced the Federal Reserve to undertake 11 straight rate hikes. But look at the UK. Their situation was even worse. Inflation touched 11.1%, a 41-year high, which triggered one of the fastest and sharpest hiking cycles in their history.
And here is where their stories completely split. The US Fed went in hard and fast, an aggressive, front-loaded approach. And you know what? It worked. They managed to cool inflation without crashing the economy into a recession. It was the famous soft landing. The UK, on the other hand, ended up tipping into a recession. It paid a very, very heavy price and lost economic output to get its inflation down.
Now, this huge difference in outcomes between the US and the UK, it brings us to a really crucial economic concept for your mains exam. This is one you should definitely write down. It's called the sacrifice ratio. So what is it? Put simply, the sacrifice ratio measures how much GDP you lose for every 1% that you bring inflation down. So if we apply this to our examples, the US achieved a near-zero sacrifice ratio. They got inflation down without really losing any output. The UK, however, had a much, much higher sacrifice ratio, and the cost was paid in the form of a recession.
Okay, so now let's bring this whole discussion home, to India. While the RBI was facing the exact same global pressures, its strategy had to be different. And that's because of some unique structural hurdles in our economy. Understanding these is absolutely key for writing a nuanced answer.
The RBI definitely took action. It raised the repo rate by 250 basis points all the way to 6.5%. But notice the approach. It was very measured, and it was followed by a long pause. Now, unlike what we saw in the UK, this calibrated, careful approach slowed our GDP growth. Yes, but importantly, it did not push our economy into a contraction.
So the big question is, why is the RBI's job so much more complicated? Well, this chart here tells you a huge part of the story. Food items make up almost half of India's entire consumer price basket. Now remember, raising interest rates is a tool to control demand. It can't fix a bad monsoon, and it can't fix a supply chain problem, which are often the real reasons for high food prices in India.
Exactly. And this is a point you must mention in your analysis. The way monetary policy affects the real economy, what we call its transmission, is just slower and less direct in India than it is in, say, the US. And this isn't just our opinion. The RBI itself has acknowledged this structural fact, which explains why its approach is so cautious.
And just when it seems like the domestic inflation problem is starting to look a bit better, a whole new challenge opens up. The currency, the Indian rupee, has been weakening. Now, why should you care? Well, a weaker rupee makes everything we import more expensive, especially critical things like crude oil. This is what we call imported inflation, and it adds a dangerous new dimension to the RBI's already difficult job.
All right, let's pull all of this together. This final section is all about how to structure this knowledge for your mains answers and, of course, for your interview.
So when you get a question on this topic, remember these examples. If they ask about the effectiveness of monetary policy, you have to talk about the food inflation problem in India. If the question is about the sacrifice ratio, you can contrast the US soft landing with the UK's recession and India's middle path. And for India specifically, always try to mention the policy trilemma, that challenge of juggling inflation, growth, and the currency. It shows a much deeper level of understanding.
So we want to leave you with this final thought to really chew on. As the world changes, has the main job of the RBI shifted? Is it no longer just about fighting inflation, but about a more complex battle to keep the currency stable? Think about that. It could very well be the next big theme in India's macro story. We hope this analysis has been useful for you. Keep studying hard, and we will see you in the next explainer. All the very best.